Today, we're going to pull back the curtain on the invisible machine that controls, well, basically all the world's money.
You know that feeling, right? When the price of your morning coffee creeps up again, you might blame the cafe, but the real reason is so much bigger. You've just felt a tiny tremor from a massive global economic engine.
That's right. It's a vast, complex machine with all these interconnected parts you can't even see, but trust me, its effects touch your wallet every single day. Understanding how this thing works is absolutely key to navigating the world we live in.
So to really get it, we're going to take this machine apart, piece by piece. Here's the plan. We'll start with the smallest gear. Then we'll measure the engine's power, meet its operator, see how it connects to the whole world, and finally look at what happens when it breaks down.
Okay, first up, let's look at the machine's smallest, but maybe its most fundamental part, the simple transaction.
Think about it like this. It's a continuous loop that powers literally everything. When you spend money, a company earns it. That company then uses the money to pay its employees, people just like you. And then what do those employees do? They turn around and spend their paychecks, starting the whole cycle all over again. Your spending is someone else's income, and their spending becomes income for another person.
So, inside this flow, you can spot three main players. First, there are households. That's you and me, earning and spending. Then you've got firms, the companies making all the stuff we buy. And finally, there's the government, collecting taxes and using that money to provide public services. When all three are in balance, the machine just hums along.
So, all those individual transactions, they all add up. But how do we measure the total output of this entire machine? Well, that brings us to a term you hear all the time, GDP.
GDP is pretty much the power gauge on the economic engine. It adds up the value of every coffee, every car, every service produced in a country for a whole year. You can think of it as the ultimate report card for a nation's economy.
So what does a change in GDP actually mean for you? Well, when GDP is growing, we're in an expansion. The machine is running faster, companies are hiring, and wages tend to go up. But when GDP shrinks for a few months, that's a recession. The machine is sputtering, and that leads to fewer jobs and less income for everyone.
But this machine doesn't just run on its own. Nope. It needs an operator to manage its speed and, really importantly, its temperature. This is where inflation and central banks come into the picture.
Just think of inflation as the economy's temperature. It's the rate at which prices are rising. A little bit of economic fever is actually healthy. It encourages spending, and it keeps the machine humming. But when it gets too high, your money just doesn't buy as much as it used to.
And this brings us to a kind of magic number you'll hear all the time in finance, 2%. It's the target inflation rate most central banks are aiming for. They believe it's the sweet spot for a healthy, stable economy, one that's growing but not overheating.
This chart here really shows the challenge we're facing right now. Projections for 2026 put global core inflation around 2.8%, and in the US, it's expected to be even hotter, above 3%. Long story short, the machine is still running a bit too hot for comfort.
So who's in the control room? The machine's operators are the world's central banks, like the Federal Reserve in the United States. You can think of them as the secret architects of our financial world, and they're tasked with keeping prices stable and employment high. Their main tool? It's the policy interest rate. When the economy is overheating, they raise rates. That makes it more expensive to borrow for a house or a car, which encourages everyone to tap the brakes on spending. If the economy is slow, they do the opposite. They lower rates to make borrowing cheaper. But it is such a delicate balancing act. Raise rates too aggressively to fight inflation, and you risk slamming the brakes too hard and tipping the whole economy into a recession.
Okay, so far we've mostly looked at one country's machine. But in reality, all these national engines are plugged into a giant global switchboard.
And economies connect in two main ways. The first is trade. Countries buying and selling goods and services to each other. The second is exchange rates, which is what allows all that trade to happen. Simply put, the exchange rate is just the price you pay to swap one currency for another, like how many US dollars it takes to buy €1. And believe me, these fluctuating prices have huge consequences.
For example, a strong currency, like a strong dollar, means imports are cheaper for consumers, which is great for us. But it makes that country's exports more expensive for the rest of the world. A weak currency does the opposite. It boosts exports but makes imported goods more expensive, which can fuel inflation right at home. And that brings us to the final piece of this puzzle. It's understanding that this big interconnected system is also fragile. A problem in one part of the world can go viral, and fast.
The 2008 financial crisis is a perfect and scary example of this spillover effect. It started with a housing collapse in the U.S., but that created panic among global investors who pulled their money out of markets everywhere. This led to what's called capital flight, and then a full-blown global recession. It just shows how one local problem can trigger a total global meltdown.
And these risks are still very, very much with us. As the IMF warns, current geopolitical events are threatening energy supplies and shipping lanes. These kinds of shocks disrupt growth and create a really fragile, uncertain path for the entire global machine.
And there you have it, a quick tour of the whole system. We started with the smallest gear, just a single transaction. We measured the engine's power with GDP, we met the central bank at the controls, and we saw how it all plugs into a massive global network.
You know, this machine isn't some conspiracy. It's a system of rules and incentives. And by understanding the basics, you pretty much have the map. So now I have a question for you. Having seen how it all works, what part of this global machine worries or maybe interests you the most right now?